You want me to
there
start?
There you go. You're perfect. You're beautiful. Right now, give me sultry. Give me sultry. Go. You want to be alone. You want to be alone. Sorry. Right then. So this gentleman has come in to us complaining of pain in this joint here. It's unilateral. We do not have the same problem on this one. It's been there for some while, getting worse, hasn't it? Yeah. And GP diagnosed gout, which you thought was highly unlikely because it's not inflamed, and it's not reddened and all the rest of it, which I think is exceedingly likely. So just to look at the non-pathological foot first of all, if we can swing around that way. Bog standard, just everything assessment. It's always a good idea to have a look at the healthy foot first because it gives you a baseline. So subtalar joint moves perfectly fine. Talocrural joint range is perfectly fine. Check the midfoot joints, a little bit of a prominent navicular there, but nothing untoward. Look up under there. So everything moves fine. And the passive range of movement in that joint, which we would measure there to there, probably nudging on for 60 degrees, which is what we would expect as a standard. We've got a little bit of a ridge just there across the metatarsal. Dorsal lipping, yes, but this doesn't cause any problems. So this, as far as this gentleman is concerned, is a normal foot. Coming around this side, first thing we notice is that it is slightly larger than its partner, by about 3 or 4 millimeters if you measure it. And the dorsal lipping there, the dorsal ridging, is actually on the metatarsal and the phalanx. It's not just that joint. Quick check of everything just to make sure that there's no obvious restriction, because you don't want to get halfway in and then notice that he's had a triple arthrodesis in the ankle, because that's always embarrassing. You have to build that in backwards. So yeah, that all works fine. And we try to dorsiflex the toe, and it won't. If you ignore the soft tissue there and just look at the joint, we've essentially got no movement there. So our range of movement there is considerably less. We're nowhere near the same kind of movement. We put the two next to each other and push up on both. You can really see there is a huge difference there. So in terms of how we classify this, one of my pet peeves is people overdiagnosing certain ones of these. It's not a bunion. A bunion is an inflamed bursitis on the outside of the joint. There is no inflammation there. There is no obvious bursa.
Exostosis?
Exostosis is an extra lump of bone, but we'll come on to that. It's not a hallux abductor valgus because the hallux is not abducted, nor is it particularly in valgus. So it's not an HAV or indeed an HV or an HA, because you can get them in isolation. We had one this morning that was a lovely hallux valgus. It was beautifully rotated, but there was no abduction, and you can get an abduction without the valgus. What this is a structural hallux limitus, which is to say that the hallux is limited and it is structural. It's not functional, it's not blocking up because of the way we walk, it's nothing to do with pronation or ankle movement or anything like that. It's not a functional problem. It is very simply this joint physically will not bend. When we have a look at the treadmill, what we saw was that this leg is slightly abducted, which makes sense because the foot has to spin out and roll off. And that there was a slightly early heel lift, which makes sense because the foot tries to bend there but can't, so we have to lift the whole foot off the ground on this side. That sort of compensation can cause problems in the knees further on. Now, in terms of treatment, we've got 3 basic arms of treatment available to us here. You can go down the surgical route, which will obviously fix the foot, usually take a part of the joint out, shorten this long big toe, which is grand. Obviously when it works, it's the permanent solution. It does actually fix the problem instead of working around it. However, it doesn't always work. There is the complication rate, there is the failure rate, and there is the fact that not everyone wants to take that chunk of their life out in order to have foot surgery. Option 2 is to look at footwear. Most footwear bends at that point. Rather fabulous trainers. Most footwear will bend there and demand that the foot does too. You can get footwear which has a more rigid sole unit. Walking boots in particular are very often like that, and they usually have a rocker element to their sole. That reduces the demand for bending, which is obviously a good thing. Definitely something to recommend for when we're sort of, if you have a pair of walking boots or walking shoes, and if you work in the city and have to walk to the station to and from, it's a good idea for that. Third option is orthotics. Now, one of the things that makes me old is what's the best orthotic for a big toe joint pathology. It depends on the pathology. If there is a functional problem where the toe will not bend because the plantar fascia is being over tightened, which is connected to pronation, then obviously a first met cutout is what you want. But with this one we want to actually limit the dorsiflexion. If we put a first ray cutout in there, we will plantarflex the first met, which of course will dorsiflex that joint, which won't dorsiflex. So a first met cutout here would actually be the wrong thing.
It would hurt more.
It would actually make it worse. What we need to do here is try to restrict it. There's a few ways you could do that. You could have a rigid Morton's extension, which is a plastic plate which comes all the way up here, and being a plastic splint basically, it limits the movement there. They can work, but they're a little bit on the aggressive side, and you can sometimes get problems with it trying to bend and not quite getting it right. A slightly safer version is to have an extension that comes up to there, just under the MPJ, because what you do there is you create a rocker point. If you imagine there's the foot, there's the big toe joint, and usually on the ground it bends there. If I put something under there, the foot pivots over it, seesaws over that. It's an internal rocker. So when the toe is required to bend, the heel is already sort of that many degrees off the ground, so we reduce the functional demand in that joint.
And combine that with a Rockerbotham shoe,
then
you've got
reduce
bingo.
it yet further. So what we would want is something fairly rigid through here just to support this slot, shaft pad under there, as thick as we can get away with in the shoe, and a drop off there to allow that to go into the pit. And we basically, that should improve the comfort, it should make the joint feasible for as long as possible. Ultimate prognosis is ultimately probably going to get worse. It's unlikely to get better. So ultimately there will probably be a need for surgery, but it could be kept comfortable for many, many years with the right environment.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Splendid.